Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm telling you, after listening to all the sessions yesterday and today, for the first time I started, I never get nervous or anxious about speaking, but today I just listened, I was like, oh my goodness. From Eileen yesterday, then catching the back end of David's session, I'm like, whew, what am I going to say? But I think what I always depend on is this thing, just speak from your heart. Right? That is what really matters, and that is what connects. So today, what I'm going to do, because the one thing I also didn't say in that intro, is that I'm an aspiring storyteller. So everything I do these days, I try and share it like a story. So if we go to the next slide, I think, let me talk about, I'm going to use this session as a short story on intention. Who do you think that image is of? The first time I shared that picture and I asked people, what do you see? What do you see in the light? I was 7 years old at that time. And when I looked at it, I kept saying, what was I staring so intentionally at? Why was I always so, let's look forward? And I realized, I think, from that time, that's when I started to build my intentions and my life around how am I going to be intentional around what I do, what I believe in, and what I am. So let's talk a little bit about this short story on intention as I speak to leadership, building entrepreneurs, and the journey we go on through life. So in my first chapter, I want to talk about, next slide, purpose. Now, yesterday, there was a lot of conversations that were spoken to about what is purpose. Is it the sense of resolve and determination? Is it the raison d'être that people have? Actually, what is purpose? So when you start to do something in your life and you start to do anything, a lot of times we don't even realize that there's a purpose. We just start by doing it, right? And then as time goes on, you realize, oh my goodness, this is becoming, this is forming, this is a space that I enjoy. So maybe this is what's forming what my purpose in life is. Building, developing, holding people where they are. So as I start reflecting on my first chapter around what is my purpose, it was really around that, how do I hold, how do I build, how do I make sure that in anything I do not leave a trail of blood. Now, I'm going to share a story which I've repeated several times about somebody in this room. And she's sitting right here, and she's going to look the other way. When I was round about that age, one of the first people who I met, who now, when you look at the life that they live, you start to see that journey began. I met Angie. I walked into the first classroom. I was that age, you saw in that picture I showed there. And first time in class, Valley Road, I'd come in from Mombasa, and timid, because Mombasa here, we're people of Raha, right? School was easy, now you arrive in the big city, Mombasa, everybody, the ambition, the this and that, and you walk into this class and everybody's like, who's this new girl? This girl called Angie came to the front, she's always been the way she is, that's why she became, and she grabbed me, put her hand around me and said, come. You're with me. Come and sit next to me. And she spent the first time making sure that she was looking out for me. So when we talk about leadership and purpose, I start to ask myself, when I see what Pastor Angie does today, right? Probably that was in her from the beginning, to hold people, to bring them, to see somebody new. Yes? And hold them and guide them, because not only did she see, those eyes you saw there may look like they had intention, but there was a fearfulness. And by the way, children at that age are generally a lot more, they can be very difficult. So when we talk about this first chapter about our life, and when I speak to leaders and when I look at my life and everything we do from seed to everything else, and I spent 6 years working with entrepreneurs when I started the Stanford Seed program and worked with them across the continent. And the first thing we'd always ask them, what is the purpose that you have for this business? And most people, the simple purpose was either I needed to make money, I couldn't be employed, so I found this. But slowly you started to dig into why you're doing it and the reason you're doing it. And some of them will come and say, you know what? I was sitting somewhere and I saw, so if you look at My Credit, the guy who started My Credit, he would sit with individuals and they would sit down and they say, listen, I want a loan. I need to buy something. The banks are impossible. What do? They start asking me for my grandmother's birth certificate, her ID, her certificate. How am I going to do that? And he started simply by saying, I need to help these people. But what's the one thing they had? They had a logbook, right? Which is not, you'd imagine, is not much marketable. So he used those logbooks and he started a business. But what he did starting from that purpose of allowing people to get loans, to understanding what it is they had and how do we make the most of it, he started using and he built a powerful business, one of the first, right, of learning from something which people are saying is not possible. But then he recognized, even as he did that, he started to put the things around that to make sure that that purpose was going to come alive. Because let me tell you, yes, you may give somebody a logbook, but they don't pay you. How are you going to collect that money? What are you going to do? But then as we worked with him, putting through those systems in place, the trackers on the car, so that the day you're called, you're supposed to pay on the 28th, 26th, you start being reminded. 27th, you're told. 28th, it doesn't drop. 29th, that tracker's on your car, wherever you are. And a lot of people go hide in God knows whatever. But because of that tracker, they'd walk out and find the car is clamped. Pesa. But that is how he built that business, and starting with that particular purpose. And it's the same thing when I look at Vivo, right, which is a business I've been involved in for a while. When they came, if you ask somebody like Wandia, why did you start this? Why leave IFC, a global, to start? And the first time when I met her in Bangkok, climbing with all these, those women who carry those mama must go bags, right? And she's climbed those stairs up there. I'm like, Wandia, are you sure this is what you want to do? And she's like, no, we have to learn to clothe ourselves. I'm tired of us going to look for things, and yes, I'm doing all these things, but why can't we as Africans dress ourselves, right? And that now has developed and grown into the business that she has done and the things that she does. But also the bigger thing, despite being a small person, she used to sit and watch African women forcing themselves into clothes that are not designed for our yes. As guys, things don't fall straight. I sit down and I say, why does that jacket look like that on that person, and on me it kind of does things at the back, But the first thing is that understanding that we have to recognize, if we're going to dress ourselves, we also understand ourselves. And that is where part of that purpose came around. We Africans have to dress ourselves. And as we dress ourselves for the way we look. So that's the first chapter. I started recognizing, what is my purpose? What do I want to do? How then, as we work through organizations, we do that. When I was called and I started the L'Oreal business, one of the first questions I remember asking is, what do we want to do with this business? If you sit down and say that we're going to sell L'Oreal, which is one pot of cream, which we don't even use, we're happy with Vaseline. Right? Honestly? And then you ask, and what about our bodies? When we wash, our body goes ashen. What else are you going to give us as Africans to do that? And quite clearly wasn't there. So quite clearly we said, if we want a business to be a business, that purpose is to make African women beautiful, we better have products that make African women beautiful. And hence the reason of going to look for Mr. Kinuthia and do that acquisition, because he had everything, not just from a product point of view, but also from a pricing. Yeah? Because again, we can't afford to be buying something for 600 shillings. Even if you use a dot every day, it will, it is too expensive an outlay. What about the thing that I'm going to use every day? So that's the first thing. I sit down and I say, when I speak to who I am, when I speak to who I've worked to, when I speak to the work that I've done, it has been around what actually was the sense of resolve or determination that allowed me to do that. What was a reason for that existence. So that's the first chapter as we grew. The next chapter, proofing. Now, proofing is the hardest part. I counted the other day how many years I've worked, and it was 35. Oh my goodness. I said 35. Where did 35 years go? I still remember that first day as a management trainee arriving at East Africa Industries. I still have my first pay slip, 11,195 shillings. You know, still keep it in my whatever. And I'm like, but where did the years go? Right? But right from the beginning, even as I talked about that intention and what I wanted to do and moving to the purpose, one thing I always told myself is, as a young girl, somehow I'd read newspapers. And you know, newspapers, I'm going to say this is not politically correct, but those of my generation know newspapers were your father's thing. Can anybody deny that? So the newspaper came home, it was your father's, he read it, he looked at it. So what would a young girl be doing with a newspaper? In fact, when you take it first, you're like, who took my newspaper? Right? And I used to look at these newspapers and see, oh my goodness, why is it those days, if there was a company announcing its results, they put all the pictures of the board members, right? All. Do you remember that? Maybe Mary, correct? All the board members would be there. And I used to ask myself, why is it just men? And not just men, old men. You know, when you're 11, anybody over 20 is old. But these ones were really old. They were really old, you know, and then you turn and you say again, it's the same faces, right? It is Kimoli, Allah, he's here again. Oh, it is this doctor, oh, he's here again. This one, he's here again. The same names over and over again. And I think that's when the first seed was born of saying, how through my life am I going to figure out how I change the face of corporate Kenya? How do we change that face? Not to be old men, but timeless women, right? I'm not going to say old, young, timeless women. Timeless face of many, many women. And then the second thing I sat and said, who says that it is only men who build businesses? So when we look at everything and the process and the journey, everywhere I'd go, I'd try and make sure I leave a woman behind to run that business, right? When I worked with Stanford Seed, one of the fundamental things we started with saying we wanted 25 women business I'd recruit minimum. The target Stanford used to say you have to have at least 25, 30%, which is a law. By the time I left in 6 years, we had 45% on average women coming to this program. And I think you know so many of them. Look at Shiro and Jiro. Look at Flora, yes, and what she has taken Melvin to be. Look at, I keep talking about Wandia with Vivo. Look at Sheken Duati with what she does with Centonomy. Look at Alice from Rwanda. If you see Brioche, that business, I met them in Kigali, Rwanda, and she just had one shop. And we worked, and she said, you know, first I want to come to Kenya. And then he said, if you need to scale, you need to have a partner who's going to allow you to scale, because bread is fresh, pastries are fresh, how are you going to do that? She had defined her accent. So she, you know, she's from Rwanda, Kigali. So when she came here, who'd you meet? A fellow French business. And that is how she partnered with Ruby's at that time. And now that is why you see all the brioches. Where do you see them? In all the Ruby stores, and suddenly that created a format that allowed that business to actually scale. And so for me, these are, again, when you start talking about proofing, how do you proof that journey? The other day, somebody in this room asked me, Patricia, can you prepare your board resume? That person, I'm not looking at them, but... And I started to look back and I scratched. You know, in my head, I thought it's just as recent. And then when I started to put it, I said, oh my goodness, I've actually sat on very many boards. Some I'd even forgotten. You know, when I remembered, oh yes, Nairobi Women's Hospital, one of the first things I chaired 25 years ago. you know. And then I'm like, Enablers East Africa, that was supporting, again, the first time I met one of my biggest mentors, Ali Mafruki, the late, who we worked with, and he's a guy who guided me a lot on board and mentorship and everything. And so that journey of proofing, again, becomes how do you do it, not just in you personally, but in the things and in the work that you do. So I'm happy to say that when I meet a lot of the women who are leading now in many businesses, point or other, we have worked together, right? Sylvia is one of the proud, if you look at, Sylvia was a Sunlight brand manager when I was a marketing manager. Look at who she is today. Incredible what she's done. Lina Kithuka, again, who's running Qual and now Heineken, that business. Another individual who you sit down and say, oh my goodness, this is some of the stories that you're able to tell. And so for me, that journey of proofing has to be from you personally, how you live, and saying, if I'm going to change the face of corporate Kenya, so when people start to tell me, are you doing too many things? I say, as opposed to, it's pass up or my proofing. And I always share the story, ladies, that this is where we have to debunk some of these myths. I was once asked to join some other board, and I was sitting on maybe 3 or 4, and I had a day job. So there's a particular board I had to always get approval from because of conflicts and everything else. So I speak to this chairman and I tell him, oh, I'm being asked to join this other board. I want to make sure there's no objection, whatever. He looked at me and he said, but aren't you doing too many things? I said, okay, tell me a little bit more. He said, no, but how will you handle this? There's too many things. So I sat down and I asked him, with all due respect, sir, how many boards do you sit on? He said, 14. And I said, okay, but, you know, I just left it at that. You're 14. I'm asking for the 5th. What is the difference? He said, oh, but you see, with me, and you know, he realized I'd caught him out. These are some of the unconscious biases that we have to debunk with gentleness, with care. You don't have to be, you just ask a question like that, and it hit him. Because he was on 14 boards. 14. And I told him, just work through. So what is the issue with me getting on the 5th? And when you're asking me, don't you do too many things? You know? These are the ways, the unconscious biases that we have to live with. So that's the second journey, my second chapter on proofing. If that is your purpose, if that my intention was to change the face of both corporate and entrepreneurial world, to make it more diverse, softer, be, you know, have a different face. How do you, in everything you choose to do, that you go through that? So that's the next thing. The next chapter is around ambition. Are we ambitious enough? Right? Let me tell you again, when I used to speak to a lot of the entrepreneurs and everything else, they would sit down and they'd ask the question, but actually entrepreneurs have no issue with ambition. In fact, they have too much, right? Because they want to run, and these are some of the things that catch them up, right? But the people who usually have less ambition, and it's not that ambition, it's the uncertainty, is people in the corporate side. How many of us sit here in a room and you know there's a role and you look at it and you tell yourself, but I know, maybe I'm not ready. No, this one, the number of times I have seen men make up things that they have done. And they will get away with it. Yes? They will sit as women. We have a simple, he agrees. They make up. Let me tell you, you will be in a team, and I want ladies to observe this. You will hear men say, I did this, I did that, I was responsible. Women do, we, when we're doing this, we did this, and we were there, part of that. And I sit down and ask, remove the we, what did you do? The next thing, same team member, the woman was saying the we, the man will come, I. And so to what David Osana was talking about, visibility, in the CTA I was just telling Catherine about that. Actually, the one that was watched and had the most views was on visibility. And I tell every single woman, driving your visibility is not vanity. Yeah? You imagine your work is going to speak for you. I tell you, in this era, it's not. Drop that thing that, this is vain, I'm going to be showing off, I'm going to be judged. Listen to what Mary's saying in her podcast. What I think she gets told, when you don't talk, why can't you ask? When you talk too much. These are the things you have to debunk. From an ambition point of view, if you have an ambition, you believe in it, just don't hold back. Just go for that ambition. And in particular now, as women on boards, I keep saying that why I love this particular network is, to the point that he raised, it's always the same journey of recycling the same men when I was young. Now we're recycling the same women. And that's why we need everybody in this room to show up, be visible, so that we find you, right? The number of times we're asked for a name. What is the first thing you do when somebody asks you for something? You ask for the person within your circle who you know. So if you're someone sitting with the opportunity to give opportunities, you're going to, of course, refer to the people within your circle. So you have to broaden that circle as you go forward. So ladies, one thing I want to say, in your ambitions, be clear, what is our ambition? And that ambition does not necessarily, sometimes you say, it may be not big enough, or for some, it may be too big. But the issue is, it is whose ambition? It is your ambition. Do not hold back your ambitions. And once you achieve that ambition, move to the next. And don't allow people to sit down and judge what you have done. You tell your own story. Because that's the other thing I tell everyone. Tell your own story. When you move away from something, don't let others tell that story of your ambition for you. You tell that story because you knew that was your ambition, not somebody else's. So ambition, ladies, don't hold back, right? Build it. But if indeed you need to build it, also make sure you have the guardrails to make sure it's going to be and it's going to come to light. I was at Mary's launch for her book. And I remember sitting, I won't say, okay, we're in a safe space. I remember saying, oh my goodness, I love this about Mary. My goodness, you mean Mary is going to outshine? I shall leave it there. But let me tell you, how many of us are not celebrating this girl? Can we give her her flowers? I was sitting there at the back and I'm watching body language, and Mary had an ambition. She's going to tell her story and her journey is going to inspire every little girl, whatever the age they are. And we're all little girls, right? I'm trying to dress like a little girl here today. You know, we're all little girls. She's going to do that. And that's what she set out to do. And that ambition was not going to be stopped by anyone. If you believe, remember I started intention, purpose, the proofing of her ambition. That's a journey that she's been on. So that's a powerful story. Mary, don't hold back. And if you have a pinstripe suit, they'll figure it out. Lighting is going to be sorted out. Let me tell you, technology is a great space. They're going to figure out how they make it work. So that's the next thing, ambition. Yesterday, Eileen said something about legacy. And we talk about legacies, and people say, oh God, everybody talks about legacy. Everybody talks about legacy. And there's a word she said, even if you don't coach one more person, you have proved your legacy. You being here today, there's going to be a legacy you leave. And that legacy doesn't always have to be about external person. It could be just about you, right? What is a legacy you've set for yourself? Anne and I were in National NYS together. Hey. But the legacy of that time and withstanding that I'm going to use some rude words, or being told to do chura ops, but she was very good at that. Me, I couldn't. Honestly, we survived that, being whipped, beaten, and we sit down and we ask ourselves, but to what end are we doing this? But when I look back now, it was the toughest thing I did for 3 months. But part of the legacy of that time is what has allowed me to withstand some of the toughest times. I'm not a morning person from that. 4 a.m. in the morning to run up a hill, up and down, to do what? For what? To what purpose? It is cold. But every day for 9 months we did that. And now when I'm at the toughest time and having to go through things, I sit and I say, I survived 9 months. Every day asking, to what end? For what purpose? To what? And we did it. So, guys, as we drive the ambitions, as we think about what's a legacy, think about some of the things that build also our journey, etc. But then there's another thing that we forget, something called limitations, right? And one of the things, again, I used to share this visual of when we used to work with the business leaders at Stanford and everything else, and the Graduate School of Business had a better visual of this, and they'll sit down and say, when you start doing something, that thing that I think Eileen spoke to yesterday is what called control. Control. So what do? Because you want to control everything, you forget your limitations. You forget to delegate. You forget that some things actually somebody can do better. One of the most powerful lessons I learned, even growing up personally now, before I even talk about speaking to leaders and entrepreneurs and their businesses and everything else, is that sometimes, even as women, we limit ourselves because we say, I've got to do this, oh my goodness, but the children that, and everything else. But how do you manage limitations in a work environment? You bring in more resources. So starting from the home, what do? You get yourself a good helper. You get yourself a good carer, right? So if you are able to have that muscle intrinsically, why is it when you're in a business, you find it so hard to let go? Why is it we tell ourselves, I can't do that because, you know, I need to have that control? Wearing all those hats, they're balancing, right? We said balance is something that's created. But look at what happens to your neck, right? It's heavy, it's a heavy weight to load. So one of the things we used to speak to as we grew entrepreneurs was this conversation around what are the critical resources you need in that business? How do you make sure that in anything you do, that those critical resources are there? And I'll tell you the first one that was always ignored, people. Because I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a founder, I'll manage the people. But let me tell you, you're the worst person sometimes to manage people. Because first of all, if you started a business, half of them are going to be relatives, friends, people you owe, and everything else. I remember one leader saying, but this person, they spent 1 hour going on how the person doesn't do that, they've taken the money, they've done this, and you're like, but why aren't you letting them go? But it's a relative. How will I go home now and explain, you know, that I've let this person go? But if you have somebody who manages that, they're able to put the policies and systems in place to do that. The second thing is, how do you market your business? And the biggest confusion becomes, marketing becomes sales. You say, I have somebody they sell. I said, yes, they sell, but who is doing the marketing? But are they selling? Is the marketing the selling? So no, they're two different things. But that's expensive. You say, no, marketing is not an expense. It's an investment. And the day you switch your mind to recognize that it is an investment, then you start to grow. So recognizing your limitations in what you do becomes very, very powerful. The other big limitation also, as you grow and you do what you're doing, is also acknowledging when you need to step back. The first question in any business we used to ask is, can you go away on holiday for 3 months for an entrepreneur? Never. I'll come back and find nothing. So you sit down and say, then how is that a business? What happens if you get knocked down? What is going to happen? They think about it, they say, but it will be finished anyway, it's okay, it was my business. And I'm like, but that isn't the point. Aren't you trying to drive something sustainable and growing? So the first thing is that wearing of many hats. How do you put responsibility and accountability to people who can? And even for me, in my role, the first thing I was told, even when I was starting L'Oreal and whatever else, your second bench has to be the strongest, right? So in everything I've done, I will be very honest, I hate details, they bore me. Fact. Okay? Don't put me down, don't say anything. If you start telling me to drill, detail this, my brain wanders off, where's the sun? Oh God, have I worn those shoes? Everything. It goes everywhere else, but onto that detail. But tell me to paint the vision, this is what we can do. Now, what you need are the people who are able to make it happen. Yes? In my last business, the lady who's the interim CEO now, most detailed, organized, operational person. All I do is just talk. Then you've got somebody who's going to follow through and do that. You have a finance person who adds up to the last thing. Remembers the money that was lent 10 years ago to I don't know who for how much. The interest was 5 or 3% and they didn't pay back. You need a strong second bench. So understand your limitations. And the second is that you'll never be, as much as you want to be superhuman. Right? It's not going to happen. So what Eileen said, how do you start to rest, take a step back, and not be apologetic? Because the other thing we carry also, and I'm speaking now as women, not just generally to the life force, we carry guilt. I've never understood, I internalize it. It's only now, at this stage in my life, I'm not being guilty. I wrote to my children the other day, I said, I am done. Actually, in December, I even had a party for them. Called everybody and said, my work is done. Do you see them here? Now, everything is on their own. Because I said, I'm going to stop carrying the guilt of this thing that I carry, and I have to keep going. I have to keep doing this. Today, if I come, if I don't go, I say, are you guys okay? Yeah, fine, okay. When are you coming? I don't know. I think maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, Forget that guilt. The single biggest limitation we have as women is guilt. And I'm going to urge each one of you today, are we going to say, I am forgetting guilt? Right? I am going to say, I owe it to myself. Biggest limitation from my leadership. Right? Forget the guilt. Right? And make sure you build the right resources so that you can forget it. And then the last point that I want to make in this chapter is called values. What are your values? If I go around now, value. Mary, what's your value? 1, integrity. 1, I've always said, is a compromise for me. I don't care what you do, how you tell me, whatever, I'll never compromise my integrity. Gem. Honesty. You see, for women, by the way, sit in any forum of women. Integrity, honesty, truth, sincerity. Sit in a forum of men. What is your value? Strength. Huh? These are the values you have to hold, right? Family. If family is something you uphold, how do you make sure you do it? And then the key thing to what David was saying, there's one tenet he held, consistency. Let me tell you something. If you say one of your values is integrity, hold yourself up, integrity. Next week, newspaper headline, Mary Wamai, alarm society, money disappeared. It's done. True, not true, whatever it is, reputation takes a long time to build, but takes only that to destroy. So guys, what are your values? How do you make sure that in whatever you do, in your business, if that business is going to be driven by that value of integrity, whatever it takes, how do you continue to hold your head up high and say, I'm not going down that path? I will not go down that path. Somebody says, My last business, you need to pay, do this, this, this. And I'm, oh, sorry. If it's going to go down, it'll go down with me, because if I do this, that is it. Whatever I've worked for is going to go down, because that is all that's going to matter. And then people say, but you can find people around. I'm like, there's nothing around. Because all those people who are around, the last round is going to come back to the beginning and say, by the way, do you know where it started? Right? So this thing called your values, you have to figure out, how do you make sure you hold them true, and that is what you do. So for me, as I close and we open this up to a conversation, a month ago, I attended something called the Hearth Summit. It's called Hearth. It's about what you hear, it's about your heart, it's about soul, it's about well-being. I was invited by a good friend, Edwin Masharia, you guys might know. He said, Patricia, come for this thing. It's something that you're going to get in touch with self and everything else. So I went to a country which I couldn't even pronounce, called Ljubljana in Slovenia, for this incredible Hearth Summit. And I listened to one of the most powerful conversations, amongst other things that we did. A doctor called Dr. Richard Davidson, and he gave a lot of science around how science is rewriting what it means to be alive, right, in everything you do. And he really talked about one of the things. He showed this video and an analysis looking at a child's brain. And they had babies look at something. In one, there was someone who had something trying to climb up, a mouse or a dog trying to climb up, and there were people pushing it down. And they actually saw distress in the baby, right? The signals in the baby's brain and everything, you could see that the baby was distressed, and they could see them doing, as this is a young baby under 1 year, all the ones they tested, they could see them doing this. They showed the same baby, somebody pushing this thing up, and the babies would smile, right? So ladies, in closing, the last slide is that whatever we do, just click again, we were born to be kind. We were born to be kind. And he closed by saying, if people can be born to hate, they can be born to love. If they can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. So if there's nothing I leave you, in legacy, in whatever you do in your life, just always remember that we were born to be kind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for that. And I love the closing. We were born to be kind. So be kind to ourselves first, and also be kind to humankind. Thank you very much. We're going to our next session, and she's going to introduce that. Just take a seat.
I'd like us to sample a few questions, just two, then we go to the speed dating. The rest will come afterwards. Who has a question or two? Anyone?
Yeah, my name is Catherine Nyaga. Thank you, Patricia, sorry, for the wonderful presentation. You didn't have to worry about it. I think you brought a very fresh message to us. So for me, I'd like to ask a question around what you said about sometimes feeling like you're doing too much. I was talking to Catherine the other day, and she asked me, she told me, Catherine, I think you need to stop. Yeah, she told me, you need to stop. Aren't you handling too much? So yeah, sometimes I found myself wondering, am I doing too much? And when you found yourself in such a situation, what have you done? What is too much? What is just enough? What is... Because you are dreaming every day, you want to get better. So you have to keep trying, because you always think there's something better next. The next thing is better. So at what point should you stop, if you have to stop? Thank you.
Are you okay? Are you doing each of them well? Are you being present for each of them? You're sure? You're not feeling harassed, harrowed, driving at speeds you're not used to, finding that your car, the rev is always at number 6, and because you're trying to get from one thing to the other. The thing that allows me to figure out whether I'm doing too much is if I start feeling frazzled. If at the moment you feel frazzled, you're like, oh my God, and you start compromising things that you enjoy, right? Then you're doing too much. Remember Eileen saying she was a guest of honor at her family functions? Oh my gosh, you've made it, welcome. So good to see you here. You're doing too much. So to the question that Catherine asked you, only you can know. And I had a very good board chair. So 2 contrasting board chairs. The one who told me, aren't you doing too much? And then the second one who would sit down and say that he's one of the best board chairs. And I keep telling Catherine that I learned so much from that gentleman. 2 of them actually I learned a lot from. And he sat down and said, it's not for me to tell you what you can do. It's for you to figure it out. And that's what life is about. People should never be telling you, grown woman, what you can handle and what you can't. You're the only person who can know what you can cope with and what you can't. What you're having to compromise and what you are prepared to compromise and what you're not. So the simple question, if you're feeling frazzled, you're doing too much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Near accidents all the time because you're rushing from one to the other. When you start doing double meetings. Okay. So you've got the one on your iPad, the other one on your laptop. By the way, I've done that. That's when I realized I'm doing too much. So you forget to mute. Hello, Patricia, are you there? Because you're on this one on the laptop, you're listening to this one, 2 meetings, and you're like, okay, what did you say? Sorry, network. The network is not very good. Did you say something? You're doing too much. You're doing too much. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, any other question before we go to the round table?
Mary's laughing. I think she must have done this because you can tell the people who laugh like that, we've been there. Yeah.
Okay, if there's no other question, I'd like us to go to the round table. Thank you so much. Can we have a roaring round of applause for Patricia?
Thank you.
So authentic. Thank you for always being vulnerable and sharing your story. We appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, she's not going too far away because the next session is a round table, but sometimes we call it a speed dating kind of situation. So, for the next